When I was getting into acting, I had the honor and privilege to audition for a pilot at Comedy Central that was hosted by the late, great comedian Patrice O'Neill. And before my audition, before I went into the room where Patrice was in, the one of the casting directors looked at my resume and he looked at it and saw I put some skills in there, including my finance background and my military experience. And he asked, "So you were in finance?" I remember saying yes. And before that, in the Army? I said, "Yeah." And he looked kind of skeptical. And now you're an actor. And I could see what he was thinking. This guy doesn't know who he is. He's flailing. He's going to quit acting in 6 months when it gets hard. But here's what he didn't understand. I wasn't changing careers, I was changing context. The identity underneath, the way I think, the way I solve problems, the way I adapt, that stayed the same. When I was at Merrill Lynch, my job wasn't really about stocks and bonds. It was about understanding what drives human behavior, what motivates people, what scares them, how do they make decisions under certainty. When I later became a cop, my job wasn't really about enforcing laws. It was about reading people under pressure, who's lying, who's in crisis. How do I de escalate a situation before it explodes? But at the time when I became an actor, my job wasn't really about memorizing lines. It was about embodying a character's psychology. What does this person want? What are they afraid of? How do they think? Same core identity, different context. Now, that audition, by the end, everybody, including Patrice O'Neill, was on the floor laughing. It was a complete improv scene, which I will not get into because it's kind of funny and kind of embarrassing and a little edgy in its time. But I did an amazing job. The casting director even called me and thanked me and congratulated me for an amazing work. I haven't lived that life of like acting, but I understood how to think like someone who had. And that's what identity does. Your identity doesn't determine how you think. Your thinking determines your decisions. Your decisions determines your life. Most people think identity is what you do. I'm a teacher, I'm a lawyer, I'm a parent, I'm a I'm a cop. But that's not identity. That's a role. Identity is how you think when no one's watching. It's the voice in your head when you're making a decision. It's what you default to when you're under pressure. And here's the uncomfortable truth: most people never consciously build their thinking identity, they inherit it from parents, from school, from culture, from trauma. And then they wonder why they keep making the same mistakes. Today, I'm going to show you how identity shapes thinking, how to diagnose your current thinking identity, and how to deliberately build your identity you actually want. This is Thinking to Think, the podcast about making better decisions in a world designed to make you think worse. I'm Mike Aponte, also known as M.A. Aponte, former NYPD officer, former Merrill Lynch wealth manager, former trained actor, and current executive director at a charter school in Florida. Over the last 4 weeks, we've talked about why thinking fails, how your brain works, the knowing thinking gap, and the 5 levels of thinking. This week, we're going deeper. Who are you when no one's looking? And is that the identity serving you or sabotaging you? Let me tell you something most people don't realize. You don't have one identity, you have multiple competing for control. That's the identity you present to the world: the professional, the parent, the leader. There's the identity you believe you are, the story you tell yourself who you are. And then there's the identity that actually drives your decisions, the unconscious patterns that take over when you're stressed, tired, or uncertain. Most people think these three are the same. They're not. Example from my own life, when I was at Merrill Lynch, I believed my identity was analytical problem solver who makes data driven decisions. That's the story I told myself. That's who I thought I was. But when I look back at my actual decisions during the time, I see a different identity operating. Prove you're not a failure. See, I had walked away from a military commission after completing all my training. I left before I ever served. That created a wound, an identity wound. You quit. You didn't finish. Maybe you're not capable of hard things. So when I got to finance, I was just building a career. I was proving something to myself, to my family members who had served, to the voice in my head that said I was a quitter. Every success was evidence. See, you're not a failure. Every setback was a threat. This proves you were right to doubt yourself. That identity, prove you're not a failure, drove my thinking for years, and I didn't even know it. It made me take risks I shouldn't have taken. It made me avoid asking for help when I needed it. It made me defensive when people questioned my decisions. Not because I was a bad thinker, but because my unconscious identity was running the show. So let me break down the architectural of thinking identity. The three layers of identity. Layer one, surface identity, what you tell others. This is your social mask, your LinkedIn profile, your elevator pitch. I'm the principal, I'm the entrepreneur, I'm the critical thinker. This layer is conscious. You choose it, you curated it, but is also the least powerful because under pressure, this layer disappears. Example, you tell everyone you're calm under pressure. That's your surface identity. But when the crisis actually hits, when a student has a breakdown, when a parent threatens to sue, when the district auditor shows up unannounced, does the calm identity hold? Or do you panic, deflect, shut down? If your surface identity doesn't match your behavior under pressure, it's not your real identity. It's a story you're telling. Layer two, aspirational identity, who you think you should be. This is the identity you trying to build, the person you're becoming, the version of yourself you're striving toward. You want to be someone who thinks strategically, not reactively. I want to be someone who can hold complexity without needing simple answers. I want to be someone who makes value based decisions, not fear based ones. This layer is powerful. It drives growth, it creates aspiration. But here's the trap: if the gap between your aspirational identity and your actual behavior is too large, it creates shame. And shame doesn't motivate, it paralyzes. Example, I have a teacher who says, I want to be someone who never loses patience with students. That's a beautiful aspirational identity, but it's also impossible. Every human loses patience sometimes, especially when you're managing 30 teenagers with different needs, different triggers, different backgrounds. So when they inevitably lose patience, when they snap at a student, when they give a consequence out of frustration instead of a strategy, they feel like failures. The aspirational identity becomes a weapon they use against themselves. A better aspirational identity, I want to be someone who notices when I'm losing patience and takes breath before responding. That's achievable. That builds capacity. That creates growth without shame. Layer three, operating identity, how you actually think. This is the deepest layer, the unconscious patterns, the default settings. This is who you are when no one's watching, you're exhausted, you're under threat, you have to decide quickly, stakes are high, and information is incomplete. Your operating identity is shaped by early experience, such as childhood, adolescence, significant success and failures, trauma, big T and little t, cultural narratives you absorbed, and people who shaped how you see yourself. And here's the critical insight: your operating identity drives 80% of your decisions, not your surface identity, not your aspirational identity, your operating identity. Common operating identities I see are: prove you're smart enough, as driven by fear of being exposed as incompetent; make you defensive when questioned; prevents you from admitting I don't know; results in overcomplication to signal intelligence. Or the quote, don't make waves, which is driven by fear of conflict or rejection, makes you avoid necessary hard conversations; prevents you from advocating for unpopular but right decisions; results in resentment. You accommodate others at your own expense. Fix everything yourself identity is driven by belief that asking for help equals weakness, makes you overwhelm yourself with responsibility; prevents delegation and team development; results in burnout. Stay in control, driven by fear of chaos or unpredictability, makes you micromanage; prevents adaptability when situations change; results in rigidity. Win at all costs, driven by zero sum worldview. Your gain equals my loss. Makes you see collaboration as weakness; prevents building genuine relationships; results in isolation. So I ask you, listener, all of you, which of these resonates with you? Be honest. Not which one sounds best, which one actually drives your decisions when you're under pressure. How operating identity sabotages thinking. Your operating identity acts like a filter. It determines what information you pay attention to, what you ignore, what feels like a threat, what feels like an opportunity, what decisions feel right, even when they're not. Example: two principals face the same situation. A teacher is struggling, test scores in their classes are dropping, parents are complaining. Principal A has an operating identity: fix everything yourself. Their thought process: I need to figure this out. If I involve others, it's a sign I can't handle it. I'll observe the class, create an improvement plan, monitor progress. Results: principal becomes bottleneck. Teacher feels micromanaged and defensive. Problem persists because Principal A is trying to fix a problem with a procedural solution. Principal B has operating identity: build capacity in others. Their thought process: this teacher needs support, not judgment. Who on my team is great at instruction? How do I connect them? What barriers are preventing this teacher from succeeding? Result: principal facilitates peer coaching. Teacher gets real time support from someone who's been there. Problem improves because the solution addresses the actual need. Same situation, different operating identities, completely different thinking process and outcomes. Your operating identity determines what options you can even see. Another example: crisis decision making. A student brings a weapon to school, let's say a knife. Leading with operating identity is you stay in control. Thought process: follow protocol exactly, document everything, don't deviate from procedure. Result: student expelled immediately per policy, legally defensible, but the student was being bullied, brought a knife for protection. Terrible choice, but rooted in fear. Expulsion sends them to a worse school with no support. They drop out within a year. Leader with operating identity: see the whole system. Thought process: yes, this violates policy, but what's the context? What was driving this decision? What outcome serves this student and community safety? Result: still consequence, suspension, mandatory counseling, safety plan, but we keep the student in our system where we can support them. We also address the bullying. Both the student and the community are safer long term. Neither identity is right in absolute terms, but in complex human situations, the second one creates better outcomes. How to diagnose your operating identity? Ask yourself: 1. What do you default to under stress? Control, like micromanaging, rigid adherence to plan, avoidance, procrastinations, deflection, aggression, attack the problem or the person, or do you shut down, freeze, withdraw? Then ask yourself, what criticism makes you most defensive? This reveals what your identity is protecting. If someone says, you don't understand this, and you get furious, your identity is prove you're smart enough. If someone says, you're being too rigid, and you get defensive, your identity is stay in control. What do you tell yourself after a mistake? That's question 3. What do you tell yourself after a mistake? I'm an idiot. Operating identity is fragile. Shame based. That was dumb, but I'll figure it out. Operating identity is growth oriented. Wasn't my fault. Operating identity is defensive. External locus of control. Then ask yourself, complete this sentence honestly. The worst thing someone could say about me is blank, whatever you think it is. Your answer reveals your core operating identity. That is incompetent equals prove you're smart enough. That I'm difficult equals don't make waves. That I can't handle it equals fix everything yourself. That I'm weak equals stay in control. So, how do you build a better thinking identity? You can't just decide to have a different identity. Identity change requires 1, awareness, seeing your current operating identity. 2, disruption, catching it in action. 3, replacement, installing new patterns. 4, reinforcement, making the new identity default. So here are some steps that you can follow. Step 1, name your current operating identity. You can't change what you can't see. Write down, my operating identity is, and describe it in one sentence. Examples: prove I'm not a failure, avoid conflict at all costs, fix everything myself, win to prove my worth. Don't judge it, just name it. This identity served you once. It protected you from something. It helped you survive a situation, but now it might be holding you back. Step 2, catch it in action. Set a daily alarm. When it goes off, pause and ask, what decision am I about to make right now? What identity is driving it? In an example from my life, I catch myself about to send a defensive email to a district administrator who questioned one of my decisions. I pause. What identity is driving this? Answer: prove you're not a failure. Prove you know what you're doing. The identity wants me to send a long, detailed email defending my choice with evidence and data. But the thinking identity that I'm trying to build is confident enough to be curious instead of defensive. So instead of defending, I write, thanks for raising that. Can you help me understand your concern? I want to make sure I'm not missing something. Completely different outcome. Step 3, create an if-then plan. Your operating identity has triggers, specific situations that activate it. Identify your triggers, then create an if-then plan. An example would look something like this. If someone questions my decision, then I take 3 breaths before responding. If I feel overwhelmed to do my to-do list, then I ask, what's the one thing that matters most right now, instead of trying to do everything? If I'm about to micromanage someone, then I ask them, what do you think we should do, instead of telling them? If I start thinking I have to handle this alone, then I text one person and ask for input. Step 4, finding identity confirming evidence. Your brain is an evidence collection machine. It looks for proof that your identity is true. If your operating identity is, I'm not good enough, your brain will find every piece of evidence that confirms it. So you need to deliberately collect evidence for your new identity. Keep a wins journal every day. Write down one example of your new identity in action. For example, today I admitted I didn't know something instead of faking it. Today I delegated instead of fixing it myself. Today I stayed curious instead of defensive when challenged. Over time, your brain starts to believe, oh, this is who I am now. Step 5. Surround yourself with people who reflect your new identity. You become like the people you spend time with. If you're trying to build the identity strategic thinker, spend time with people who think strategically. If you're trying to build calm under pressure, spend time with people who model that. This is why community matters. And if you want to know more, join my Substack. So this way you don't have to do this alone. Here's some real examples from my own identity shift. When I became the executive director of my school, my operating identity was still prove you're not a failure. Every decision was high stakes in my mind. Every mistake felt like evidence that I didn't deserve the role. I was exhausting myself trying to be perfect. Then I found a mentor and who told me something that changed everything. Mike, you're not trying to prove you can do this job. You're trying to prove you deserve to exist. And that's not a job problem, that's an identity problem. And he was right. So I started working on changing my operating identity to someone who learns from everything, including failure. Not someone who never fails, not someone who always right, someone who learns. That identity shift changed how I think. Old identity, I can't make this decision until I'm 100% certain. The new identity, I'll make the best decision I can with the current information and adjust if I learn something new. The old identity, if this fails, it proves I shouldn't be here. The new identity is if this fails, I'll figure out why and apply that learning to the next decision. The old identity, you don't understand the full context. The new identity, instead of being so defensive, curious, tell me more about your perspective. What am I missing? Same situation, different identity, completely different thinking. If you're resonating with this, if you're realizing your operating identity might be sabotaging your thinking, I want to help you build a better one. Every week in my Substack, I share my own identity work, case studies, frameworks, and reflections. You can sign up. I give a ton away for free, including my podcast notes. And if you sign up for the $10, you get exclusive information and an additional podcast episodes from yours truly. And maybe even we'll have some Q&As from time to time. Link is in the description. I hope you sign up. No cost to you. Next week, two brains in your head. We're going deep on system 1 and system 2 thinking. Why your brain defaults to fast emotional automatic responses and how to shift into slow, logical, deliberate thinking when it matters. Thanks so much for thinking with me. I'm Mike Aponte, also known as M.A. Aponte, and this is Thinking to Think.